Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader here. Welcome back to another episode of Jersey First TV. We're so happy to have you here. And tonight we have an important, crucial issue to talk about, which is the opening of schools in New Jersey. And to that end, I want to welcome Steve Baffico and Keri Avellini to the show. Steve and Keri, welcome to Jersey First TV.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to be here. Congrats on the show.
Well, glad to have you here. Thank you, Steve. And tonight's issue is just so crucial. I know this is getting national attention. I want you guys to introduce yourself, but I want everyone to know that you guys have together jointly, along with other parents in a class action lawsuit, sued the Montclair district, the schools there. We'll talk about that. Keri, you are the lawyer on that case, as well as a case in South Orange and Maplewood. And we want to talk about the importance of that. This is a school district that has not been open since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're talking about almost a year. So Steve, first, can you introduce yourself, please, to everybody? Talk about where you live, your children, and what you do.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Steve Baffico. I'm a resident with my family of Montclair, New Jersey. We have two children in the school system, 8-year-old in third grade and a 5-year-old in pre-K. And obviously happy to be here and, under crummy circumstances, but delighted to share some time tonight and tell our story.
Thank you, Steve. And Keri, you are the named lawyer on the case, but you're also a parent. Talk about that.
Right. Yes. Hi, I'm Keri Avellini. I'm parent to one of the plaintiffs in the South Orange Maplewood lawsuit. I live in South Orange Maplewood with my husband, my 3 children, and I have 2 children in the school district, one in 6th grade and one who is a freshman at Columbia High School. And yes, I'm also happy here to shed light on what's been going on in our towns this last year.
So thank you, Keri. So Steve, let's start with the timeline, because when I read the lawsuit, what struck me is not only the length of time that this school district has been shuttered. I mean, we're talking not hybrid, not back in at all, doors closed for now almost a year. But not only that, there were so many instances of promises of we're going to open, it's going to be next week, it's going to be this date. So to the best of your ability, can you take us through that timeline since the beginning of the pandemic last year?
Sure. Look, I mean, I think I'll certainly relay our experience here locally in Montclair. I think one of the things that will probably resonate with the audience is, unfortunately, a very familiar refrain of delays, failed openings, competing interests, among the stakeholders. We, like many districts in New Jersey, went to remote learning as the pandemic came upon us. I think everybody assumed it would be and believed it would be a temporary solution. Clearly, going back to the spring of last year, very few districts, if any, were adequately prepared for remote learning. And so I think, for most, the experience was suboptimal, let's say.
Yeah.
But I think most people and families and students understood that this was something unprecedented at the time. And folks, teachers and school districts did the best they could under the circumstances. And I think that most are quite patient and understanding of that. Clearly, as the year, the summer and the following school year dragged on into September, certainly the remote template was more highly evolved,
Right.
as you would expect it to be. But this, again, was really set up under a very temporary pretense, which we assumed and had kind of set various milestones to meet and dates under which would correspond to go back to school to an in-person learning or certainly a hybrid learning program.
Right.
In Montclair, we had a number of those postponements. Some of those were due to kind of statutory enhancements. Again, this is probably familiar to your audience. Many of the buildings are older. They required some degree of short-term remediation work.
Right.
So upfitting to the HVAC systems or ventilation or making sure the windows open and, the basic kind of social distancing things that were required. And so there were a couple of false starts with that. I think parents and students grew increasingly frustrated with the kind of imprecise timeline and the inexactness or the opaqueness of the information and news flow coming.
Right.
Clearly, as those, postponements or failed opening dates mounted, I think increasingly we saw as a community a growing sense of frustration.
Right.
And a parallel with that in Montclair was, I think an acknowledgement, or certainly an observation, that there was a growing rift between Board of Ed and Super and the teachers union. And that's been a longstanding kind of, Hatfield and McCoy's kind of feud in Montclair. Again, maybe not unique to other districts in New Jersey. But I think the longer the pandemic went on, the more challenging it became to get these sides to work together.
Right.
The more obvious it was to us as parents that these sides are digging in. The teachers union are, protecting their interests. The Board of Ed is kind of on paper going along with it, but not, acting incredibly strong or accountable to its shareholders. Our super is a good, is a good guy. He's new in the role, doesn't have a lot of political capital, and he's kind of in the middle of it. So this really built up to January 25th of this year, which again was, the latest aspirational reopening date. And this one was built up, by everybody, by the administration, by teachers. Students were very excited. Now you have to remember, at that point, you're talking 9 months since our students had been in a classroom, and I'm talking any kind of classroom instruction. Right. So you start to kind of understand the impact of isolation for that period of time. An 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, teaching themselves in front of a computer screen for 8 hours a day. So, there's a compounding of academic, emotional, social, physical negative impact. Having said that, there was a lot of excitement and anticipation about that reopening date. Right before that, maybe 2 days before that, the teachers union gave notice to the board that they would not be coming back to school. And that they, in fact, did not agree that the remediation work had been done. They didn't believe the engineers' reports. They wanted to do their own reporting. So very quickly they put down a hard marker and they walked out. And I think for many of us, that was the last straw to get involved, proactively. I think as parents in many districts, we've been upset, but much more reactive than we have proactive and deliberate. And so for many in Montclair who rallied around this, that was really the hard catalyst to say, okay, enough. You've got, competing interests here, or certainly two sides that can't deliver reasonable results in a reasonable time frame. It's broken, and nobody's going to fix it except, a third party, i.e., parents. Right. So we did, stage a couple of rallies, protests, things that I think had certainly symbolic and significant, optical impact, and it brought some attention, or greater attention to the issues. And then we were kind enough, or we were good enough at that point to cross paths with Keri, who had been on her own, crusade in South Orange Maplewood as a parent and as an attorney, and the problems or challenges there, in many ways were parallel to what we were experiencing. I think, each district, as we've gone through this, has maybe some different idiosyncratics, district to district, or maybe the public enemy is slightly different. Maybe it's the teachers union, some places the board, others. But the basic misalignment of interest is, very, very common, which is you've got teachers unions who are, continuing to act in an obstructionist fashion because they're in the, acting in the interest of the teachers union. You have boards of ed and supers who, have a duty and obligation to be accountable and are not. And for the most part, they're fighting each other. So it leaves parents as an advocate for students, as the only ones that don't have a voice, or the most important constituent, which is the kids, have no voice.
No voice.
In the discussion.
This is incredible to me, right? This whole time you're explaining all of this, there's no voice for the children this entire time. And I have to tell you, what also struck me in this lawsuit was not only the timeline and the repeated sort of odyssey of false starts that never happened, but also the details of what the children involved, the parents talked about in this class action. I want to get to that in a minute, but Keri, I want to switch to you for a second because you're doing this also in South Orange, in the district that you live in. So the one in Montclair was filed February 18th. So we're still fairly in the beginning stages of this. Keri, when did you file the one in Maplewood, South Orange?
I believe the filing date was January 29th.
Okay.
So, but we're still in the beginning stages of that.
Sure.
There'll be a hearing in April on our request for a restraining order.
Okay.
So, and I haven't seen any briefs or paperwork filed by the district yet.
And we're going to talk about the basis for all of this, but just so the audience knows, these were both filed in federal court, correct?
Yes, in the
Okay.
the district court for New Jersey.
So, Keri, I want you to talk about your daughter a little bit, whatever you can share, because I know that you're not only attorney on this, but you're also a parent, and we'll have Steve talk about that as well. But can you share with us what's been going on with her and what her struggles have been being out of school for so long?
Yeah, it hasn't been good, Elizabeth, at all. My daughter is a sixth grader, and she is a recipient of special ed services. And I like to tell everyone what a success story she was. Once we identified her disability and got her the help she needed, she was like a different kid altogether. And in 2 short years, made up for all the prior years' loss that she had experienced. And then, like Steve said, we trudged through, last spring with the remote, and I knew she wasn't interested. It was very difficult for her, but I said, we'll get through it. And then, we'll get her back to speed in September.
Yeah.
And of course that never happened. And then some point between Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays, she started it's called school refusal, which, I'm learning about now, and would not participate in any of her virtual classes. And not only that, wouldn't do any of like her art assignments, practice her violin, do any of anything that was asked of her. So I, talked to the teachers, I talked to her doctors, and they said, okay, school's opening January 19th. Let's wait until then and see how she does. So, the rug was pulled out from under us so many times. And it was just kind of that last week in January, just like Steve said, everybody came to realize the game that was being played. And, we weren't asked to come and participate in the game at all. So I got a group of parents together very quickly and to get the lawsuit filed, because I wanted the district and I wanted the teachers to know that this was coming, down the pike while they're still in discussions. But unfortunately, in February, I think it was the 15th, about the time we filed the Montclair suit, the teachers union announced they weren't coming back, and we don't have a date as of yet. And in the meantime, my poor daughter has digressed to the point where she's been diagnosed with high levels of anxiety and depression. And now the doctors are considering putting on her, antidepressant medication, because
Keri,
she can't handle like what's happening to her. She's just not equipped to handle it. So
not only is she suffering, but you guys are suffering. I mean, let's not forget the parents.
Every day I have to watch her, and see what she's going through. And there's like literally nothing to do. You call some of the private schools in town and they're all filled. You ask for an out-of-district placement, and that takes time. So there's other avenues, but none of them are going to help her get healthy anytime soon.
Well, Keri, you're being a voice for her. That's what you have to do as a mother, and I applaud you for that, and Steve as well. Steve, why don't you share your personal story as well as some of the others that are listed in the Montclair lawsuit, because it was pretty terrifying for me as a parent to see that these young children, and guys, we're not talking about high school missing your prom. Believe me, my heart goes out to these kids that are missing life events. We're talking about regression, and we're talking about developmental milestones not being met. I mean, this is stuff that is hard to make up. Steve, tell us your story.
Yeah, look, Elizabeth, I think that unfortunately that is exactly right. You really can't make this stuff up. I mean, in our case, our third grader we've certainly seen a marked regression in a number of these metrics. Again, it's really difficult to expect, even with, two parents that work and have made the adjustments, I think like many parents have, to try to, provide as much assistance and guidance day to day. It's asking a lot for an 8-year-old or any child of that, age and maturity level to essentially, follow along without distraction and, absorb the materials and stay motivated. and stay excited about school. I mean, I think we saw in our home, kind of an interesting dichotomy, and I would share this again with your viewers to give consideration or merit to. Our third grader has gone through a terrible time with now, as of the 13th next week, 1 year plus of remote learning. That's no interaction, in person with students. So the socialization skills absent, whatever kind of pod the families can piece together. It's terrible for self-confidence, right? Particularly at that age, and particularly for young girls who are developing a sense of confidence and a sense of self.
Sure.
So, between and among the academic challenge that remote learning or extended remote learning is presented, where you may not be getting the personal attention, you may not be, obviously you're not in a one-to-one classroom setting, which makes a huge difference. We know that from our own professional interactions.
Right.
Zoom is great as a surrogate, but there's nothing like getting around a conference table and having a meeting. And
absolutely.
So it's the same for kids. And I think the takeaway for them has been, again, this regression academically, or certainly falling behind academically, but this really, really critical regression socially and emotionally, which I think we think has profound long-term effects. I would share, a couple of unintended consequences, but really, really meaningful discussions that I've had since we went public with this last week. We've been, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about this. The response to this has been incredible across the state and across the country.
Right.
But one thing that we really didn't anticipate is the response locally from folks. And what I would just share with your audience is, as you go kind of across and down the socioeconomic scale, those with less resources and less means are so much further left behind and affected by what we're describing here. And the number of people, I've had single moms with 3 jobs call me and say, look, I have to leave my 6-year-old at home for kindergarten, remote by herself because I work 3 jobs and I can't take off. And what you all are doing is giving us a voice and an advocacy that we don't have. And that's not one phone call, Elizabeth. That's, a dozen, of those type of, folks who are reaching out saying, this is meaningful. This is widespread. It's impacting people all over the place.
All over this country. And they're looking for hope, and they're looking for someone to stand up for them, Steve. And you guys starting this, and I know this is growing attention. I know tomorrow you guys are going to be on Fox and Friends, I believe, and you're getting calls now across the nation. Of course, you've gotten them across the state, but it's hard to really fathom that this is happening to children in America. And when you look at the lawsuit, Keri, and you look at the legal standing for the legal basis for it, I want you to talk about that, because you know what? The truth is, it gets to the very basic issues of what it is to be an American and everything that you cited. So I want you to go through for the audience what you're citing in the lawsuit in terms of the legal standing of this case.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, we're using federal law and state law. So we're making claims under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and we're making claims under the New Jersey Constitution. And then we have some claims under some federal statutes that deal with educational service for kids who need special education, Section 504, and the IDEA Act, which some people who have children in the system would know what that means. The act that created the IEP, essentially. So going to federal court gives us a chance for the court to hear the federal court claims as well as the state court claims. And if we had gone to state court, they wouldn't be permitted to hear the constitutional claims.
Right.
So the claim under the 14th Amendment has 2 components. It's the substantive due process claim and the equal protection claim, and just basically says that kids in America have a right to a basic minimum education. At least that's what we're arguing.
Right.
Remote learning and being locked out of their schools is denying them of that right. And then we also have an argument under the Equal Protection Clause, which says, especially in New Jersey, that some districts are open and some kids are thriving and our district is closed. So they're being they're being classified differently than other individuals in their class.
Right.
And that goes towards the New Jersey law, which says all children in the state need equal access to opportunity.
Right.
And again, with the school closures, and there's, I mean, the argument is like a no-brainer. There's no opportunities educationally or otherwise for these kids while they're home learning remotely.
No, clearly, all of these issues are paramount. And what struck me as well is, where is the science? And, we've been asking this of our governor for a while. What are his decisions based on? Where is the science? Where is the data that supports these decisions that are being made? And I found it so fascinating, Keri, what you put in your brief about the dashboard science. Everyone can go look at that themselves. What was the name of that website again? It was COVID-19 dashboard, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
COVID-19-dashboard.com.
Yeah, COVID-19dashboard.com.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, COVIDschool-dashboard.com.
Got it. COVIDschool-dashboard.com. Now, what's fascinating about this is not only do we not have our leaders telling us what this science and data is, that for some reason Montclair is closed, but Verona right next to it is open. We don't understand that science. But not only that, that particular website shows and proves by stats that teachers are actually safer, if I want to use that word, being in school. Keri, talk about that data. It's fascinating.
Yes. No one talks about it, but if you're in the school with children, you have a lesser chance or lesser risk of getting COVID. And I think one of the studies said that schools, I think it was 15% higher for staff and educators teaching remotely than if they were in the schools. And all the studies too that we included show through countries throughout the world that children are just not transmitting the disease.
Right.
And you see that everywhere. I have a son in our local Catholic school, and he's been full-time since September, and there's been no in-school transmissions. And the cases that come into the school is a case where the child is exposed at home.
Right.
And then the school takes the appropriate precautions. That class might go remote for a week. That student might be asked to stay home for 2 weeks. And it's worked beautifully. It worked exactly the way the science said it would work.
Yeah.
So, and in particular in South Orange, and I'm sure the schools in Montclair, these are representative samples of the population that the public schools are located in. And there's no reason to think that kids who go to public schools are transmitting the disease, but the kids that go to private schools are not. I mean, the argument is just absurd.
The argument is absurd. The data is not there to support what's happening. The science is not there. And I think as intelligent people, it's hard for us to process that. Steve, what is your feeling on this? Is the union, what are they thinking? Are they just using this to an end game to their benefit? I mean, I'm not really understanding what their approach is here and how they think they're going to win from keeping you guys shut down.
Well, Elizabeth, you're not alone in your question or your concern about that. I think that it's hard not to take away from the behavior of the union, and I would also be very careful. I mean, we've tried to be very careful in the words and the sentiment, in the statement and in the lawsuit. We think that the suit that we filed gives us, an important seat at the table as stakeholders in finding solutions where others can't. And clearly, in the case of Montclair and many, many, many other districts around the state and the country, you have to illustrate and highlight the bad behavior of the teachers' unions.
Right.
Now, that is not to denigrate, and I certainly would separate the admirable efforts of teachers individually in the remote classroom, who I think have largely done a good job under difficult circumstances. But it's hard not to come away with the view that the interests of the teachers union or the teachers union is solely acting in the interest of the teachers union.
Right.
Murphy came out yesterday and has now prioritized teachers, and rightly so. That's a great development for the vaccine. And part of, the other rationale in filing this suit is to establish an objective set of parameters today that people will agree to go back to school with. It is also an incredibly important marker to set down, which prevents this from happening next year, 2 years from now. If we lose this as parents, and I want your audience to understand this, we have to get our kids in school now. We've got to establish what are those objective guidelines that accomplish that. everybody's got to agree to it. But it's an incredibly important precedent to set. Otherwise, you lose control to these unions and you will never get it back.
Yeah.
Or you'll lose more control. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's hard to defend the union's position, and that's not excusing the bad behavior of the boards, mind you, but it's hard to excuse the bad behavior of the teachers union when today, as you point out, the math and the science are working against them. The successful precedent of schools opening safely everywhere is working against them.
Right.
The legal pressure, I think, between and among various suits, our template included, is going to put a lot of pressure on them to, potentially have to concede way more than they would have otherwise, when it's done through a court mandate. And finally, they're losing in the court of public opinion by the day.
Yeah.
So there isn't a lot of, I don't think it leaves a lot of credibility to the position that they're taking. And I would just add one more thing. Again, I think your audience can relate to this. The goalposts seem to move by the day with these groups. So, you can't tell me it's building safety yesterday.
Right.
It's teachers' vaccinations today. It's children's vaccinations tomorrow. And then the next day, it's the $26 million of improvement for the district that we don't have. So
which one is it? Which one is it today? And yet, as I said before, nearby towns are open, right? Not only that, you have nursery schools open, you have private schools open, you have all kind of schools or daycare type centers open all around you. And it's, we've made enough jokes about COVID being this intelligent virus that knows when to enter a building and when not to. It's becoming sort of ridiculous, and for you guys to suffer to this degree. Now, how many other districts have reached out to you? Because you were telling me before we went live. Now, this is like a national thing. You guys are getting national attention for your stand.
Yeah, look, not anticipated, nor was it our intention. But I will tell you that, since announcing this last week, publicly, we wanted to really kind of sting the union and the board and embarrass them a little bit, which we did. That news has traveled fast, and thanks to Keri's work and others, the response has been remarkable. It's one of these viral sensations that I think is really just beginning. We've been contacted by parent groups, over 25 districts just in New Jersey in the last 2 days. Now, these are folks who've come and said, we saw your lawsuit. We have the same issues. We want to file. Will you help us? Will you represent us? Now, that's just not New Jersey, Elizabeth. That's across the country.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking to groups now from Fremont, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Chippewa Valley, Michigan, Columbus, Ohio. This is happening everywhere. And what I think the takeaway is simply that these are not localized issues. These are not, specific to Montclair, South Orange, to New Jersey.
Right.
It's happening all over the country. Kids are hurting. Parents have had enough.
That's right.
And, teachers unions continue to be obstructionists, and boards and superintendents continue to lack accountability. And this is a national phenomenon. I would give Keri a ton of credit. She's agreed to represent all of these groups pro bono.
Wow,
and we're seeing a crazy groundswell. And I would also point out a huge thank you and kudos to Jersey First, who stepped up in a nonpartisan way to offer all of the resources, legal, administrative, logistics, horsepower to put really a mass assembly line, class action litigation assembly line together. And I think we're going to make some real noise. And that's going to be quite hard to ignore in New Jersey or across the country when that starts hitting the docket.
Well, that is a very good point, and that is the whole reason for Jersey First. And you guys see the ticker down there, go to jerseyfirst.org. Listen, this is about standing up for families, for our children. This is about the future because, as you said, what are they going to do when another virus comes in? What are they going to do when the flu season is tough? What's going on here? We need to get back to our freedoms. We need to protect our children, and we need to set the right precedent going forward. So Jersey First is there to help with all of this. And I want you guys to go to that website because we need to support jerseyfirst.org. They are helping with this lawsuit and anything else that's all about protecting our rights. So Keri, time is of the essence. That's kind of the problem here, though. You're in federal court. How soon can we get this thing moving? And what do you expect next? Because these kids are still sitting home every day.
We'll have a hearing date in April with the judge. The same judge was assigned to both cases, so I'm hoping he'll, if we can get the paperwork in for the Montclair case relatively soon, we'll hear them both at the same time. It's interesting, I'm not exactly sure what the board is going to respond, whether they'll file a motion to try to get out of the case or just simply file an answer and ask for the court's help and, settlement discussions. So I haven't spoken to the attorneys on either of the cases yet, but I'm hoping to speak to them soon. Again, I went into this with, I don't want it to be a political issue, and I really don't want it to be so adversarial. I just really want everyone to know what is going on with our kids and finally, let the kids speak up. It gives them the voice that that they're missing.
Keri, hats off to you. I mean, you're doing this pro bono. You're also a mom who's fighting for her daughter. Steve, you're fighting for your daughter as well. And all of these parents, and I have to say to anyone with these younger children or even high school children who are hurting, get help. Don't sit there and just suffer, and get help for these children. This is unprecedented time, and we need to make sure we fight for them. Guys, go to jerseyfirst.org. And tomorrow morning, what time are you on Fox and Friends, do you guys think, tomorrow?
We will be on Fox and Friends at 7:25 Eastern, and having a great opportunity to appear and elaborate our story.
Okay, so everybody watch, because, hey guys, at least we're leading the way in something amazing in New Jersey, right? Which is fighting for our children. So guys, thank you so much, Steve and Keri. We could talk more. I've got to let you go, but everybody watch this story. Watch tomorrow morning. Stay in touch with jerseyfirst.org. We'll be back next week. And hey, when things happen in this case and things break, we'll come back and talk about it. Guys, thanks for fighting for our children, and thanks for putting Jersey first.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.